And I would now like to introduce today's presenters. Jimit Arora, partner, leads Everest Group's research offerings focused on enterprise executives in IT, sourcing, and vendor management and shared services. Michael Jansen, Chief Research Officer, guides the practice's research agenda and architecture by leveraging his extensive experience to identify and unlock emerging trends. Parul Jain, Practice Director, a member of the global sourcing team, and assists clients on topics related to service delivery, portfolio optimization, benchmarking, operational review, and growth strategy. And with that, I would now like to turn things over to Michael.
All right, thank you, Dave. And hello, everybody. This is this will be our biggest webinar of the year as we start to look forward into 2022. We chose the title very carefully. We know that this is a hot issue with all of you. And we also kind of framed it as, it's not really a talent war anymore. It's not something that you can do some things and then prepare to win. And the reality is it's a new reality. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to take you through a whole bunch of facts. We're going to show you how this fits into the context of your organizations and your peers. And then what we're going to do today is show you those facts. Got a whole bunch of questions that people have submitted to us. We'll try to get to a couple of those today, and we'll follow up with the rest after the webinar. But I also want to promote the upcoming series that we'll have that will be in support of this, where we'll show you additional findings from the research study that we've done. And we'll take it further into the action side of the house here. So we'll be talking about the top 5 success driving actions for 2022.
Yeah. And thanks, Michael. I think in some ways what we've laid out is the agenda for the first couple of months, in fact, Q1 of next year, as we take these key issues and break it down across the different stakeholder groups, right? So really looking forward to these dialogues with all of y'all. So jumping right in, what's really going on, and as we've examined every year over the last few years, what are some of the big business constraints entering the new year? Not surprisingly, there's a lot of attention on 2 supply chains that seem to be facing a lot of challenges. If you look at the first issue, it's about can't find enough talent to run the business. That's the talent supply chain that's facing a lot of stress. And then, of course, the physical supply chains, right? So if you look at business challenge number 2 and 4, those are talking about the logistics being bottlenecked or people not really finding the right raw materials to operate the business, right? What was one of the biggest issues last year was, hey, can't find enough customers, and the organization not really being able to adapt to the changing business environment, round up the first 5 issues that we see businesses contending with as they enter 2022.
Yeah, and you can really look at that that sequence there, and usually you would say the revenue is being the top concern of organizations, always trying to drive more and bigger revenue growth for the organization, but it's taking a back seat to these logistics issues of talent and product, if you will, for organizations. So one of the questions we ask is kind of a proxy for optimism or growth intentions in an organization. We ask headcount growth of the organization itself. And we've been doing this for a number of years here. And what you're going to see now is that it's sitting at the top of the last 3 years series here. So, overall, we had a 5% growth going into pre-COVID. COVID dropped back expectations, and now we've more than outpaced the pre-COVID numbers here. You'll see Asia Pac is high on the list, and North America is kind of right there in the middle. So again, you can look at this and say 7.5% people growth. That's going to turn into a double digit, call it somewhere between 10 and 15% revenue growth expectations, depending on your industry. So, we wanted to show you some facts here about why talent has now become the structural issue that we're all being faced with in the market today. COVID created a lot of noise out there, and we'll talk about that in just a second here. But the real issue was bubbling just below the surface in what we call our population pyramids. And so this is probably the most impactful structural chart that you should be considering in your as you think about 2022, but also think about 2032 as well, because these issues are not going to go away. And what you see on the screen here, we'll start with the North American and Europe in the dark blue. And you'll see that we have now gone, this is a pyramid, a labor pyramid should look like a pyramid. And in this case, what we've done is we've actually had a decline in the number of workers coming into the workplace compared to the previous generation. So we're at a point right now where North America and Europe are actually producing 2.4 million less workers entering the workforce each and every year. Now, India has a little bit more of a pyramid. It's showing increasing number of workers still coming into the marketplace, and so that's good, and that would be part of the solution, obviously. But even India, if you look at forward into the 0 and 4 and 5 to 9, they're going to be challenged with the same issues of declining populations going forward here.
And Michael, a couple of points here, right? In some ways, we are comparing one country with two continents, right? So there's India on the one hand, and then North America, Europe. So I do want to reinforce that it is about the size too, that we have to keep it in context, right? So at the bottom of the pyramid, it's 116 versus 60. So it's almost like a 2x multiplier. And then to borrow lines from a popular song, it is all about the base if you don't have people. So yeah, that's the fact that we really need to optimize and be watching out for.
Yeah, and we don't want to be negative here. We want to talk about the solutions as we go through here, and what you guys are doing about it. But at the same time, this is the immovable set of statistics. These things cannot be changed. I mean, there's a longer term view, but in the next 20 years, these are the numbers we're going to be faced with that we're going to have to deal with as both a economy, a business, and a culture. All right, so let's talk about some of the things that have recently added to this, the population pyramid challenges. So, and we're not going to have exactly precise numbers to these things, but we know that the labor market's been challenged with immigration policies. And I'm going to stay away from the politics here, but we can point to two prominent America First policies have restricted immigration. In one point we could actually look at the statistics was reduction in student visas here in the U.S. by down, I think they were down like 300,000 pre-COVID. And then you can also look at Brexit, which were restricting immigration and movement of people. We can also look at COVID deaths, and the numbers are a little bit challenging to look at it in a concrete way, but we do know there were over 2 million deaths in both North America and Europe, and 600,000 of those were of working age. Okay, so it was definitely something that impacted older generations, but it did have an impact into the working age as well. And then finally, we have the government subsidies, and again, those are hard to quantify. But they did create momentum to people staying home and allowed people to rethink their lives. And that leads us into the last point here, a whole multitude of cultural views that have changed, being contributed with the population pyramids, but also the COVID onset.
And I think that last one is also very important, especially as we think about the current talent situation. People are trying to think about where that work-life balance seems to come in, what the role of the office is as they're thinking about the future lifestyles they want to have. And I think some of these factors are causing people to make decisions about how and where they want to work, which is also impacting participation of a large percentage of the labor force in the overall demographics of where people can work. So if you layer all of this in together, beyond the demographics that we looked at, lots of issues make this a long-term reality, as Michael mentioned, versus just being a short-term talent war.
Yeah, and so you saw the population pyramid. We call that the immovable force, if you will. So that's 2.4 million less in North America and Europe. But then you can add on these, and whether it's 100,000 or 200,000 or 500,000 here and there and across the spectrum here, these things all contribute to what we're seeing and are going to be the challenges that we face for, again, not only next year, but the decades to come. So, all right, let's get a sense from the audience here. We want to get maybe a little bit lighter view of how you're feeling about going into 2022. So we're going to open up a quick poll, and you're going to see some very serious answers on there. You're going to see some lighter answers, but go ahead. This is a select all that applies. So you can feel free to choose more about your sentiment coming into 2022. We've got 2 weeks left in this year, 2021, but how are you thinking about going into 2022? Just give a sentiment view. This is not the this won't be a kind of the hard science of some of the other questions, but let me see what's ranking at the top of your perceptions. Okay, now we have some definite highs and lows on this chart here, Jim, I'm looking at here. All right, we're going to close it off in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, so let's look at the answers here. And the good news is people are feeling optimistic overall. So that makes me smile and say, listen, the number one answer here was 2022 should be a good year. That's the number one issue. Probably, let's see, if we're going to look at number 2 here, you're going to be talking about concerned, ready for 2021 to be over with. I think there are probably a lot of people feeling that way. And then worried about the Omicron. So there is that bifurcation of optimism and concern here. And Jimin, I'll talk here. I personally put the one on the last one. So if you remember a year or so ago, we were worried about toilet paper issues, and doesn't look like that's a big concern, though. I have to say, just for the record, I went by the paper aisle, my Target last on Saturday, and the paper aisle was completely wiped out. So I guess everybody's got their stockpile, not feeling concerned about it, but maybe that's an issue. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I still have my mug from last year, which had toilet paper and hand sanitizer as the keywords from a supply chain perspective. But it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. But it's a good thing. Just 2% of the people are worried about the concern, Michael, you have.
All right, so let's take it into the more of the hard, rigorous data here. So we're going to take you through the number one issue. We've got a number of viewpoints on that, of the who, how, what, why, and where. So Pearl, why don't you get us started on that, and then we'll take it through the other sections along the way.
Definitely. Thank you so much. Okay, so every year basically ask people, right, what are the top challenges that they expect to cause maximum disruption as they strategize for the next year. This time, one theme that kind of stood out, the top challenge is talent shortage, bumped up directly from rank 5 in the last 2 years to rank 1. In fact, if I were to think back, right, in the last few months, almost every single conversation I've had with industry leaders has been about one thing: talent. Not just about the widening gap between the demand and supply for talent, but the cost of not having the right talent at the right time. So, and in this global phenomenon of overall talent shortage just kind of manifested itself in higher salaries. And now those are also showing up in actual rate increases from service providers in existing contracts. So that also leads to the second kind of the concern, which is around price and cost pressures. Has been a big theme this year, kind of accentuated through the talent shortage. We're seeing partners, service providers asking for wage hikes, mid-cycle revisions, especially for niche roles. Interestingly, the third key challenge, which was adapting to new business models, which was actually number 1 last year. New models essentially meaning things around work from home, future of work, satellite pods, ensuring that you have your resilience playbook kind of in place. People are worried less about that. Talent and price cost pressures kind of have taken more mindshare. Seems like most folks have kind of figured out that part of the puzzle and are still struggling with the talent reality. Other concerns around regulations across locations has become a key concern, but people kind of were more worried about recovery from pandemic last year. I think this year that's less of a concern.
Yeah, and Pearl, I think we focus in on the talent, but one of the things also to focus in on here is that inflationary price cost pressures. And this, I've been in this industry 3+ decades, and the entirety of that period has been about takeout of costs, lowering of cost, changing the mix, going to low-cost locations, leveraging of technology, et cetera, to improve processes. And that's always been about cost takeout. This is the first time in my history that I have actually seen the needle move the other direction. Okay, and it's not only the talent pressure, but I think it's also some of the monetary and some of the inflationary that we're seeing in the general economy as well. So I think those are going to be things that we're going to spend more time talking about, is how do we deal with the price cost pressure, and what does that mean for our industry in terms of both the revenue and the cost side of the equation in the sourcing industry. So pay close attention to that as we go through the year.
Definitely. Now, peeling the onion here a bit, and let's kind of diving into the what, where, and why aspect of this talent shortage, right? So when we asked people around, what is the primary cause for this talent shortage? If you move to the next slide, please. Turns out not finding enough resources is the most common pain point. In fact, based on one of the recent studies we did, almost 3/4 of the employers globally, and this is a 15-year high, kind of struggling to find workers which kind of offer the right blend of technical skills and human strength. So not finding right people seems to be an all-pervasive issue. Rising attrition comes next. In the last 2 to 3 months, I think across the board, we've seen companies reporting 10.5% increase in attrition rates. And as people start leaving, firms try to attract the next door neighbors for immediate backfills. In turn, they hire from you. So it kind of creates a painful spiral here. Now, while COVID might have lit the overall talent shortage fire, it's now become a much more complex situation in terms of understanding the overall services supply demand mix, and requires a much more sophisticated approach right now. The other causes rising salaries, wage inflation, like Michael just talked about. Interestingly, even longer duration of offer to hire cycles is kind of becoming a pain point here. More or less, I think these are the key causes on the talent shortage side. Also, we turned to tables and asked employees instead of employers around will they stay or will they go? Michael, do you want to talk about the findings there?
Yeah, so we typically ask questions of what your organization is doing, but this time we're asking what you as an employee were thinking about. And we had a lot of participation in this, a lot of interest in here. And what it nets down to is 25% are not doing anything. They're content with their organization, but 75% of you are looking for a change. We asked that and delved down and a little further into the data. And we asked, kind of broke it into 2 areas, active and passive. And when we net it all out, half of you are actively looking to make a change, either in your organization or outside your organization. And I think that's kind of a reaction of, we talked about the attrition going up. Well, then once you have attrition, people look out and say, hey, my buddy got a raise. I'm going to go across the street and get a raise. And then there's this whole cycle of recruiting and I went over there, got 20%. Somebody else came back and paid 25% going back the other way. It's not all about the pay too. The pay is important of it, but it's also about the culture of the organization, a lot of other factors in terms of the employee engagement, things like that. So with this much movement going on in our industry, it's going to certainly make the delivery and the opportunities challenging as we look forward here.
Absolutely. Now, continuing with this thread, let's spend some time talking about the where part of the problem, right? As in, where do companies find it most challenging to find people? What we found out is that the problem is most severe in the legacy onshore locations, North America, Western Europe. And as we talked about the population pyramid earlier, right, this problem is here to stay. It's not an immediate quick fix. If not for multiple decades, definitely for multiple years, this problem is going to stay on. Within these regions, if you kind of see what is underneath, the shortage is more pronounced in tier 1 cities than tier 2, 3, where companies are scrambling to find talent despite availability of large pools. Now, interestingly, India is amongst the top 3 geographies with severe talent shortage. And this is despite having a much more favorable kind of a demographic mix, population pyramid, unlike the Western nations. Now, we believe the pandemic kind of accelerated enterprises on their digital transformation journey, which in turn created enormous opportunities for organization. And I think the customer centricity of the tech industry in India, overall positive demand environment, kind of many companies announced aspirations to grow in double digits, which in turn resulted and kind of exacerbated the entire war for talent. Now, other geographies have not been spared either. In Central Eastern Europe, we see locations like Poland, Czech Republic, Romania facing the most heat. Players in Philippines, Malaysia, China have also reported nuanced challenges. I think in general, there's kind of a race to becoming, and being seen as the most attractive talent hub across the world. For instance, we're seeing locations like UAE announcing plans to roll out green visas, expand eligibility for golden visas. Also locations like UK, US, Australia, rethinking efforts to attract talent maybe fast tracking some visas for highly accomplished applicants. Okay, now if we drill down to uncover what's underneath, let's kind of look at which roles companies are finding challenging to hire for. And what we're seeing here is that this challenge is most pronounced in the IT services space. And if you talk about the tenure, it's most common at the mid-level. And no surprise, this is where the biggest kind of raises for 2021 were also reported, averaging about 15%. But the generosity is kind of not limited to, say, the high demand roles like techno-functional skills. We also see transactional workers receiving an average kind of 10 to 12% raises here, driven by shortage. Undoubtedly, there are a lot of variables at play in terms of geographies, industry, scale, but this kind of shows how real the scramble aspect of the talent war has become.
So to Pearl there, let's take a note here in terms of when we talk about the 2.4 million less workers coming into the picture here, that's across lots of different segments and lots of different industries. And what we're seeing now is like when the competition between the industries is becoming, it's not just competition from one service provider to another service provider, it's competition within industries. So if you have a shortage of truck drivers, that creates a whole series of challenges. We've seen the retail industry start to, really come into its own in terms of, hey, we're short workers, we're going to hire and we're going to raise wages substantially here. So in the U.S., we talked a lot about going from $8 to $10 to hey, let's go to the $15 minimum wage. We blew by 15 pretty easily, and now I'm starting to see numbers that are upwards of $20. Well, okay, so how does that impact our industry? Well, so we think about the call centers and some of the transactional workers that are in play here. They used to be competitive with the retail, and if they were content to pay $12 to $15 an hour, now they're having to raise their salaries. And so you get the snowball effect of not only the macro, but it's also hitting our industry directly.
And as a result of that, right, so Michael, what's really going on is that there's a lot of focus right now to move away from labor-based models to digital models, right? And primarily the sentiment that's kind of going around is that one of the biggest beneficiaries, I use the word loosely, of COVID has been that we've really accelerated the digital transformation agenda. And which is why if you look at where people expect to add headcount, engineering and IT are seeing numbers that are in some ways unprecedented in the last 5 years, right? So a 5+% increase in headcount on the IT side, almost a double-digit increase on engineering, large portion of which goes to digital engineering, with 9%. GBS is the lowest among the 4 categories we look at. Part of it is if you look at the data in 2021 in some ways was the year of GBS. People added a lot of capacity, which is why expectations are somewhat modest. But you can see that there's a fair degree of confidence across business functions about how people want to add capacity entering the new year.
So if we look at how does that impact salaries, and what you're going to start to see here is significantly increased salaries. And we've approached this in a couple different ways over the last few months here. And in every case, we're seeing kind of that 5 to 10% or 5 to 10% moving up in terms of expectations for 2022. So I've heard of a couple managers saying, hey, we're going to give out 1 to 3%. And I wish those folks good luck, because they're going to experience the fun of attrition as the marketplace moves up and kind of in lockstep with inflation and the whole talent shortage. And so it's going to be a budget busting year this year, I think. Okay, so let's move into some of the structural challenges that we covered. Talent on the kind of the who, what, why, and where. Jimit, talk to us about some of the sea change we're seeing underneath at the organizational level.
I think, and people are now, we've framed this as a talent scramble for a while. And what this is really causing a lot of companies to do is to totally re-examine how they configure supply. One of the more evident strategies that we are seeing is there's more companies who are looking to increase the degree of outsourcing and in some ways offshoring. So one big response that we are seeing is moving work out of the organization. About a third of the organizations we surveyed indicated that they expect to move 19% of their work outside the organization, right? So a fifth of the work goes outside. I know we've got a variety of stakeholder groups in here, but for those of you who are in the sourcing and procurement functions, the signal from your peers is we expect to do more and in greater, volumes with greater speed. That said, there's also a desire to move more to a GBS environment. And Michael, if you recall, around this time last year, we were speaking about how people wanted more of everything, right? So everything was on the table, but we said, hey, we need to have more of everything. We expect that sentiment to continue to play out through more outsourcing, through more GBS, through more offshoring. And that fundamentally hasn't changed as a response strategy.
Yeah, and I think, the other obvious answer here is going to be, yes, everything's on the table, but technology is still the big play here. And if you look at the next slide here, what you're going to see is the cloud solutions, cybersecurity, analytics. That sequence is all important here, adding the AI and the automation. But the sequence has not changed over the last year. Okay, so I think people are still going to be looking to deploy technology. And it's, yes, we can go out looking for new locations and pockets of talent, both in our current markets and also new markets that we can, that Parul and her team spend a lot of time looking for talent pools. But technology is the obvious other answer. So if we can't hire people, let's make them more efficient in what they're doing. Let's make them more productive. And let's make them happier in their jobs. So let's improve both the customer experience and the employee experience. So Jamit, another one of those aspects of it has been the whole challenge or the whole trend toward ESG. And one of the things that I've looked at here is how real is it? What does it really mean here? And so we're starting to actually do a whole research line in this on this topic here. And this was one of the questions we asked in this study.
Yeah, and I think this is an important theme. I was seeing some Q&A come in, and people are saying, hey, the whole thesis around how you retain employees, company culture, value proposition, the sentiment of purpose over profit becomes important, right? And I think as we are looking at organizational responses, they fall into two categories, right? So one is, what are you doing for the people, which is the human dimension? And then what's the corporate citizenship that you are embedding into the DNA of the organization? So as we ask people in terms of where different priorities are and how easy or difficult might it be to execute, starting from the right, the challenging areas remain, and this has been amplified due to COVID, how you think of employee health and well-being, right? That is a big issue, and this extends beyond the employee to the employee's family. In some ways, there's a social dimension that this is taking on. Data security is becoming another issue that companies are grappling with, not just from an ESG standpoint, but in general, the whole cybersecurity world that we live in, especially when everyone's remote, more vulnerable to attacks, etc. Right? So those are some of the high complexity challenges that people need to solve for. Somewhere in the middle is this whole emphasis on diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. So lots more. I think we've moved beyond just conversation phase to really plans being put into motion to execute. So I think that becomes another big area of focus, along with, impact sourcing, inclusive recruitment. Some companies are also seeing this as a way to address alternate supplies of challenge, right? What remains somewhat easier, given that we've got playbooks in place, is things around supplier diversity. So becoming an important criteria in a variety of sourcing procurement processes, but that's an area where people know there's work to be done, but we have a playbook that's now been established over the last several years.
Yeah, but even in that supplier diversity, there's some changing standards there. So even that one's gonna have to be examined. One thing I talk about in this one, there's a lot of mixed messages with this whole ESG topic. And, we did an analysis just this last month that we were talking about what would it take for you to move? And so we asked questions around salary, we asked questions around work environments, and we asked questions around ESG. And one of the things that was on the top of the list was obviously compensation and benefits and stuff like that. Work environment. all the diversity and ESG messages tended to be at the very low end of the priorities of employees. So, I mean, I think there's a whole lot of messages, and I think we're going to use 2022 is to delve in there, what's really working there, and what's kind of window dressing, and what employees are valuing, and how do we all come to consensus on the best way forward for this in our industry. All right, so now what we're going to do here is we talked about having follow-on webinars on the various stakeholders that we serve, GBS, sourcing, and IT. What we're going to do right now is we're going to show you a couple sneak peek slides from those segments of the research. And so, Pearl, let's take you in. You focus on the GBS practice. Talk to us about what you're seeing there and a couple of the key elements.
Definitely. And I think one question which I saw recurring in the chat pane was, what is GBS? So that's Global Business Services, one of the terms synonymously used for shared services, captives, global in-house centers, essentially the internal arm of the organizations. Now, what we see here is in terms of priority areas, right? In the year of 2021 has been the year of GBS. We've seen GBS market continuing to grow, prosper, kind of undented by the COVID-19 pandemic. In fact, we believe there are strong expectations, high expectations from GBS going into 2022. More work coming into the kind of a centralized GBS model. And when we asked leaders around what their priorities were, IT services and analytics topped the charts, kind of gaining maximum mindshare and investment. And in kind of the next comes are things around BPO, finance, accounting, industry-specific processes. In general, like more judgment, domain-related work where businesses kind of like to keep their fingers on. Other functions such as HR, CC, sales and marketing support, already kind of well penetrated, still seeing some growth, but not among the top 5 themes that we expect from GBS leaders. Okay, moving on to talking about the geography footprint shift. At an overall level, we see, kind of all options on the table, kind of a view here. We see an increase and decrease across offshore, nearshore, and onshore markets. But one kind of geography which seems to be a clear winner here is the nearshore. And this nearshoring trend is kind of gaining momentum for both GBS and service providers. However, the momentum is much stronger for the GBS segment. And this is kind of, a result of combination of multiple factors, most notably the kind of desire to optimize cost rather than, say, setting up headquarter locations in Western Europe. You kind of get those cost savings if you were to look at, say, Poland, Romania, Czech Republic, Hungary. One of the second driver is that most CE locations have kind of shown that maturity to handle complex problem statements on IT, ER&D, BP side. We're seeing these locations, some of the centers also kind of carving out into COEs, taking up end-to-end ownership here. The third angle is the increasing push to de-densify the large hubs, especially by service providers, India heritage providers, especially here. Now, another trend which we see gaining traction is that the share of work in the source geographies such as US, UK is expected to decline. This ties in with what we talked about earlier, that enterprises plan to shift more work to the centralized GBS model.
So Pearl, in this case, we're still kind of amplifying what Jamit said. There's still everything's on the table. And so people are still looking at lots of different alternatives here. I would say that one thing, the movement toward more onshore, I think there was a lot of, hey, when we all went work from home and people said, hey, we need to bring the work back bring back the work to onshore. That trend, because of some of the shortages and the cost structures, has kind of subsided in the major way. It's still happening a little bit, but it's not the same trend we saw a year and a half ago.
Exactly. Yep. And if you were to kind of, then talk about the changes that are expected, say, in their operating model. Now, GBS leaders believe that, that the first one is kind of consistent with last year, which is reducing or rather optimizing the leverage of real estate. I think based on multiple studies, interactions that we've had, a hybrid model kind of is emerging as the go-to choice as the operating model. Obviously, depending on each organization, their risk appetite, how they've kind of had their experience with remote delivery, they lie on different ends of the spectrum, but hybrid model kind of seems to be the go-to choice here. Now the second and the fifth ones, basically leverage of tier 2, 3 locations and increase in number of geographies and countries leveraged, they're kind of interesting. So what we're seeing is that GBS organizations want to diversify their footprint. There is higher emphasis or preference in kind of penetrating the same location which they are comfortable with, but getting into the tier 2, 3 markets so that you can add more, have access to more untapped talent pool, at the same time have the comfort of knowing that geography. We're also hearing a lot of clients interested in exploring untapped geographies, going in to the broader point around setting up more spoke satellite centers in these locations, maybe go in small, test it out, and then expand as required to, one, leverage the talent pool where you get lower attrition, potentially some cost savings, and some nuanced pieces around, hey, can I get maybe specific language skills or some niche roles, etc. So those are some of the trends or the changes that we expect going forward.
All right, great. So Jamit, let's take it into the sourcing stakeholder. A couple preview slides from that study.
Yes, and you know what's really interesting here is that I've spoken to a number of you before, right? We started off the year with this being very well recognized as a truly buyer's market. We did a U-turn somewhere in Q1, and now we're kind of entering 2022 in being in a supplier's market, which actually is not even a supplier's market, it's an employee's market. So that has some really profound ramifications of how sourcing organizations need to think about their role in 2022, right? The big thing is we are moving away from the thesis of faster, better, cheaper to the faster, better. Cheaper is going to be hard in a talent constrained environment. So if you look at the number 1 and number 2 priorities, it is the, hey, we want better, so service quality and faster delivery time and productivity. So if you see it's kind of falling into, we want the services fast, we want them at high quality, and the right companies are willing to pay the right premium for this. I know there were some questions about, hey, there's a dichotomy of trying to save prices while also save money on prices while also managing attrition. How do you do that? And that is going to be the fine line that companies will have to think through next year. And I think it's really interesting to look at, the top 4 are about speed and quality, right? And in some ways, number 5, flexibility, is the engagement model to enable the right speed in some ways. So if there's 2 themes that we're really going to see be important for sourcing and procurement, is going to be speed and quality, while trying to run it without fundamentally blowing up the budgets. And then how people are going to do it? This is one which is the answers are literally across the board, right? So a third of the companies are saying 30% they expect to work with the same supplier base to get to the outcomes they want. 25% expect to make significant changes to the supply base and add new providers, right? Was with a client yesterday that on IT specifically, the theme that we seem to be seeing is on the run side of IT, work with fewer, work with incumbents, move to managed service. On the change side or the build side of IT, this is where people are adding new suppliers. In some ways, the priorities for 2022 should be, how do you control the sprawl that is likely to be introduced into the system as we keep adding suppliers to meet to business needs. And then, what are some of the big concerning aspects about thinking of the third-party supply, right? Last year, interestingly, the number 1 issue was how stable are our suppliers, right? So service provider financial stability, as we were entering 2021, was the biggest priority. Next year, it's about performance. And I think what people really mean about performance is their ability to access the talent and get it onboarded quickly across a variety of situations. Interestingly, we've got notice of a pretty significant vulnerability that exists just yesterday. So cybersecurity remains front and center. And I think companies are concerned about, especially if you go back to our earlier comments about adding more sprawl, adding more suppliers into the mix, the risk and controls that need to be placed to ensure cybersecurity is managed remains really important. So supplier performance, cybersecurity will be the top two areas for companies as they're thinking about next year from a third-party risk standpoint.
Yeah, it's good to see that service provider financial stability, the stability of our industry is not being questioned, and it never really was threatened. Jamit, one thing I want to go back to what you said just a few minutes ago here. Think about how much change Jamit was indicating here in just 1 year. Going from a buyer's market to a service provider market to an employees market, and that trend that you think about, those things normally would have happened over a period of years and happened just within 1 year where we've seen that much structural change.
Yeah.
Now, I'll go back to that immovable population pyramids. That's going to be with us for decades, and that's not going to change. The only thing that I can see out of that would create a different dynamic in the near term would be a good old-fashioned recession or a downturn in the marketplace where talent was no longer the demand for talent was artificially or brought down because of economic situations, but demographic ones are going to be with us. So I think it's keep on your toes. Who knows what 2022 by Q2 is going to be like. We could see a whole different set of dynamics.
Yeah.
But here's where we're at today. So that leads us to the offer that we make here, and what we're going to do is for enterprises. Well, for enterprises that have current memberships with us, you already have access to the price check. But what we're going to do here is open up this offer here for those folks that are not current members and get a taste of what we do. And normally, what we do when we do the price check, it's really helping to make sure you're not overpaying for your resources. At this point, when we're talking to clients, it's almost, are we paying enough to be competitive in the marketplace? And so if you're interested in getting a price check and you're an enterprise, feel free to click the link that Kira has put in the chat window, and it'll take you to a website. You can just click on a few buttons there, or you pick the roles and the applications and the countries, and she'll be happy to set a motion, get a set of price checks for those rates there for you to compare what you're paying today. All right. So let's do this. Let's go into the last section here, Jamit, and you're going to lead us in the IT direction. What's happening in the IT? Just a sneak peek.
And before that, Michael, you're speaking about the changes that have happened in the past 1 year alone, right? I look at your pictures and Parul's picture at the beginning of the intro slide. You look just the same. I lost a lot of hair in the last 12 months, right? So yes, that's been one of the challenges of this current environment, and that is the pace of change that we're seeing. And it's a very interesting trend if you look at what are the challenges from an IT standpoint. And there's a literal lateral inversion, right? So the issues that were 1 to 5 have fundamentally flipped. The top 5 issues have not changed, but their order has reversed. So we started the year with companies concerned about budgets and budgetary constraints. That's still in the top 5, but at number 5. We felt that talent was not going to be an issue starting the year. And as we enter next year, sourcing talent for next-gen technologies is the #1 theme for companies, right? And again, if you look at the list, getting the talent, getting the productivity, which amplifies speed, dealing with data privacy and cybersecurity, it's an ongoing concern. How you really create that right IT workforce strategy, and then again, budgetary constraint. Those are the top 5 issues that CIOs and their teams are wrestling with. I do want to call out the distinction between 1 and 4 for a second. I had a client kind of describe it to us as sourcing talent for next-gen technologies is the issue that we have right now. So this is where we're thinking in months and quarters. When it comes to the right IT workforce strategy, this is where we're really thinking long-term. So there are companies out there who are thinking about their technology talent strategy going out to 2030, going out to 2040, applying sustainability principles to really see which locations do they need to start investing in now to be really able to get the benefits 10 years from now. So the sophisticated companies are really taking this to the highest level of rethink and making sure that everything's on the table and they're designing for the long term.
In fact, kind of taking this long-term view has become imperative of sorts, considering the talent situation is not going to get easy. So one needs to kind of have that longer picture, big picture vision to think about not just the right locations, the right talent skills, the kind of skills you want to invest in, the roles you want to kind of go big, all multiple, the models that you want to leverage. It's kind of a multifaceted, multi-pronged kind of an approach that requires to kind of create a holistic and a sustainable solution.
Okay. So what's going to happen to budgets, right? We did speak, hey, budgetary constraints are no longer a number one issue. And no surprise, right? People expect to be able to spend more in 2022 versus the current year. If you look at the graph on the left, right, there's a small 2% that expect to see negative growth. A quarter expect to keep it flat, to borrow one of Michael's phrases from earlier in the webinar. Good luck with that. But, 3/4 of the population is expecting to see upwards of 3% growth, and the mode falling in that 6 to 10% growth range for 37% of the respondents, right? Traditionally, if you go back, IT budget spend growth rates have been expressed in, low single digits. 2 to 4% increase was the norm. What we are seeing right now is globally, we expect this to be roughly in the 7% range, 6.8 per hour data. North America, so emerging markets such as APAC, you would expect to see a higher, which is a low base effect. So you expect that to get into 10%. But even in North America, Europe, we are seeing upwards of a 6% anticipated IT budget increase, right? A large portion of this is going to be on account of higher wages that people will have to assume for their increased talent hiring needs. Go back to the slide we had earlier about 5% more IT, 9% more in engineering. A large portion of these budget increases are going to factor in the increased hiring and increased wages in those environments. So what do you, Michael, you want me to keep going?
Yeah, go ahead. Why don't you hit up on the things that are 6 to 18 months? What can organizations do? And this is really what the theme of the upcoming webinars is all going to be about.
Yeah. And here's where, for those of you who've been on webinars with me, you probably know that Douglas Adams is one of my favorite authors, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. The reason it was the most popular book was it had the words "don't panic" written in big, large letters. I wish we had a slide which said "don't panic." Yes, this feels like a situation where people should panic, but we do think that there's a lot of strategies, which is essentially the top 5 actions you should be taking that we'll be talking through in our webinar subsequently. But I think the one realization that we see the sophisticated organizations have, what we call pinnacle organizations have, is they're recognizing that you need to bust the budgets, right? Yet at the same time, you start thinking of these not as budgets, but you start thinking of these as investments with tangible ROIs. The tangible ROI comes in the form of customer experience, employee experience. So your business case, especially in IT, is becoming a growth business case, not a savings business case, right? So I think that's one thing that we are seeing, which is a mindset change. You have to diversify your supply base, right? You have to think about the right place for the right roles. You have to use impact sourcing. I think that came up earlier. Parul, you mentioned that. One of the strategies that we're seeing, and if you don't have a playbook for doing this, make sure you're looking to create those playbook. Companies are challenging, hey, do we really need that college degree, or can we be looking at community colleges? Can we be looking at under-resourced communities? So this is a impact sourcing dimension, but also expanding available talent pools conversation. Gig workers is becoming an important part of the conversation. When we speak about workforce strategy, people are thinking holistically about employees, contingent workforce, outsourcing, and gig, right? So that's a near-term playbook that you should develop. And then, we looked at the base, we looked at the population pyramids. Yes, the population pyramid, even in a place like India, potentially Philippines, they aren't as robust as they used to be, but there is value in scale, which is why we're seeing an increased focus in terms of expanding leverage of India, especially the tier 2, tier 3 cities, as Parul mentioned earlier.
So Jimit, let's look at the longer term things that we can actually solve some of these. So some of the things on the left side are going to help with the solving, and some of them are just kind of stirring the pot, if you will. Increasing salaries doesn't really fix the problem. It just helps you in the immediate short term, and it makes your costs go up. But those back to that robust technology, we're going to have to continue to think about the processes that we have in place, continue to implement that. If you want to grow by 20% and you're only realistically going to maybe only be able to hire by 10%, you're going to get 10% more productivity. And so you got to continue to rethink about that for all the right reasons. I think what people are going to start to think about is not this next year, but over the longer term, start to explore where the population pyramids are still pyramids. And so that the one location that sticks out from all the rest is not Latin America, but Africa. And the population pyramids there are quite healthy. And so that, I'm looking at Africa being kind of like the new version of India, from 20 to 30 years ago, still unproven, still pockets of opportunity there. But maybe the realistic is we're going to need the resources out of Africa one way or the other. The other place is to look for within, look into different groups of people that may have been overlooked previously, see what we can do to find pockets of talent of, maybe it's a group of 50,000 total for each one of these areas. STEM education, to continue to encourage education. I look at STEM education being in some of the populations around the world, especially like India, they have an opportunity to improve the overall mix of their highly educated and lesser educated folks, and that I can actually make the population more productive over time. And then the last one, I'm going to stick away from the politics on this one, but the other way of solving a population pyramid deficiency is for easier immigration. And so while that's politically charged, that's another very realistic opportunity. And then I'm going to go for the very long-term solution, which is have more babies. And so I've been working hard, talking to Jamid, talking to Parul, talking to my grandson, or talking to my son, and who's just had a grandson. That's ultimately, I'm going to stay away from the politics of it, but ultimately we really do have to think about what we're doing to our economies and to our societies here. Otherwise, there's going to be a host of not just sourcing issues to deal with, but it's also going to be a bigger challenge. So again, have more babies. That's my ultimate answers. And aren't they cute? I mean, who can argue with that? So, all right, so we're wrapping up here. Jamit, let me ask you the question here. How are you helping clients?
Beyond giving them advice and having more babies, yes, there are a few more playbooks, right? I will say, right. So since you brought the levity into the conversation and you brought kids, one of the key themes, and there's this song that I like, Sweet Child of Mine, right? Speaking about children, there's a refrain towards the end, where do we go now? That seems to be the issue that a lot of clients are wrestling with. Where do we go now, right? And so if I look at the 5 use cases that are really going on, where we are really working with a lot of clients, number one is executive alignment. People want a lot of education on the issues. There is a bit of an ostrich mindset that, yep, this is a temporary thing. It goes away in a quarter or two. So we are helping our clients understand that this is longer term. You mentioned the right pricing thesis, which is where we're also running a offer for folks, which is, are you paying the right price to get the resources at the speed you need? So that's another area. Diversifying supply, be it adding new suppliers, be it adding new locations, or even adding, global in-house centers. That's a big use case that we are working with clients on. Helping people think about their skills upgrade. So how do you really establish the right skills inventory and the skills passports to take and develop a future-ready organization? That's a big theme. And then finally, we spoke about the long-term workforce strategies. Workforce strategies is the comprehensive review across your employees, contingent, gig, impact sourcing, and outsource channels. So how do you really create that future-proof supply model that kind of rounds up the top 5 use cases, which we are delivering to our clients through memberships and projects?
All right, fantastic. I want to do one more promotion of the upcoming webinars. You'll see that on our websites and emails, certainly going into the more in-depth on what we showed you in the sneak peeks for the stakeholders and more toward the action of how we're going to solve these problems. We've got just a few more minutes here for questions. I wanted to, there's so many questions here. How will you help? How will outsourcing help? Since I've been a long-term veteran, is it the same job market where they look for talent? And that answer is true. So if we're all looking in the same markets, outsourcing versus insourcing won't help by itself. But the optimistic part of me would say the outsourcers are also very incented to go looking for new places of talent. So when I look for investments to be made, sure, individual companies can make them in their own communities. That's probably a logical answer there. But as an industry, we will be looking into talent pools. Maybe Africa is the next new version of India or the Philippines. But that's where the outsourcing can help and make those investments. Pearl, you want to jump in there?
Yes, in fact, coming from a location standpoint, I think we've seen service providers being more, they have a higher risk appetite. So they've experimented with more locations, say Latin America about a decade ago, now Africa. So GBS and kind of enterprises have followed the suit, kind of sitting on the fence, but service providers in that regard have kind of experimented, forayed into a lot more diversified locations, hence getting, broader access to talent there.
Yeah, and I don't want to sound as being pessimistic or negative here. I want to be realistic, okay? And Pearl, I think you and your team right there are spending a lot of time investigating the options that are available both for the service providers and in the GBS insourcing solution set. So very important here. Jimmy, did you want to add anything before? There's a whole bunch. There's pages and pages and pages of questions here, and what we're going to try to do is, Jimmy, if you want to get one more of those, we can probably hit that. But we're going to promise to try to follow up with folks, or you can send a direct message to myself or Jamid or Pearl via LinkedIn or email, and we'll be happy to set up a conversation.
I'd say I'd take one, which is, hey, what challenges do we expect on the wake of the Omicron variant? Is it more likely to affect global sourcing, supply chain, logistics beyond 2022? And here's where I'm an optimist, right? I would say that what we've seen over the last almost 2 years now is that the industry can adapt, be it GBS, be it outsourcing. We've had to evolve different playbooks, but both customers have been able to adapt, suppliers have been able to adapt, the employees have been able to adapt. So even though there will be the threat of these variants, I do think that the industry has proven its resilience, and that resilience gives us a lot of confidence as we think about 2022 and beyond. Yeah,
and again, very proud of this industry, been part of this for a long time, and to see us to go through last year and the customer satisfaction scores to be high. I think we will solve the problems, but we have to acknowledge what's the first rule there. You have to recognize we have a problem, and part of the webinar today was to illustrate the challenge we have, and let's go out and figure out ways to make it happen.
Don't panic.
All right. So there's a lot of stuff on our website. Feel free to do that, to look there, or give us an immediate call. And I want to thank you for your time today, Pearl and Jamit. Let's look forward to it.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks, everyone.